In the year 1156, a number of disaffected lords on the Scottish Isles rose up against their king, Godfred Olafsson, a Norse ruler who had at times held sway over Dublin as well as all of the Scottish Isles. The coup was a success, and the rebels quickly seized half of the kingdom. Often traditionally portrayed in later years as a Gaelic uprising against the descendants of Nordic overlords who had conquered the Isles many hundreds of years before, in reality the event was more likely a civil war between the Norse, many of whom had now over the generations developed a distinct Norse-Gaelic culture. 2 years later, by 1158, the rebels succeeded in defeating Godfred entirely and driving him from power. The new ruler of the Isles was a ruthless warlord, often portrayed as a Gaelic hero, and he is the patriarch of a multitude of Scottish clans. His name was Somerled. Little is known of Somerled's early life, besides his belonging to a Norse-Gaelic family of some importance. The 12th century was a time of relative prosperity for the Scottish Isles and the Isle of Man, all of whom were ruled by a Nordic warrior elite who had conquered and settled the islands many hundreds of years before. Nevertheless, much of the population remained Gaelic in custom and language, and as the years went by, they began to form a new distinct Norse-Gaelic culture, different from the Scottish to the east, the Irish to the south, and the Norse across the sea in Scandinavia. Although often portrayed as a Celtic hero fighting against foreign Scandinavian influence, Somerled was in reality partly Scandinavian himself, and likely not too dissimilar from the previous king of the Isles, Godfred. Somerled first appears in the historical record in 1153, when he supported a rebellion against the newly throned King of Scotland, Malcolm IV. Following this unsuccessful venture, he turned his attentions closer to home, rising up in 1156 alongside a coalition of discontented Norse-Gaelic nobles against their king. Godfred had himself seized the throne in 1153 upon the death of his father. This was a brutal, unforgiving time, when warlords vied for power and the strong took what they wanted. Military might and maritime prowess meant all, and Somerled, as the strongest of all the Norse-Gaelic warlords, managed to match Godfred in a brutal sea battle near the Isle of Man. In the aftermath, they agreed to partition the kingdom into two. Peace didn't last long, however, and just 2 years later, Somerled set about raiding Godfred's lands, before eventually leading a full-scale invasion of the Isle of Man, driving his enemy entirely from the Isles and uniting all of them under his singular rule. Later that year, he travelled to Norway, where he obtained legitimisation from the king as the rightful ruler of Man and the Isles. Somerled ruled as the undisputed king of the Isles until 1164, when he launched the final and definitive military expedition of his career, travelling again to the Scottish mainland, this time along with a large army and fleet, and with the intention of launching a full-scale invasion. During the previous months, after he was contacted by several rebellious Scottish nobles intent on removing the new king from power, Somerled agreed to help their cause and occupied himself in raiding the Scottish coastline. In response, Malcolm demanded his fealty and the reduction of his kingdom into vassalage to Scotland. When no response was given, both sides amassed their armies and prepared for war. Somerled is said to have led 15,000 warriors upon a vast armada of 160 longboats. They sailed towards Renfrew at the Firth of Clyde, where Malcolm was amassing his forces. The Scottish army was likely more modernised than Somerled's, and numbered numerous Scoto-Norman knights and armoured men-at-arms amongst its ranks. Somerled's Gaelic and Norse warriors were unable to break through the Scottish line, and before long, Somerled himself, leading from the front, was cut down in the fray. The Norse-Gaelic army quickly fell apart after the death of its leader, and in the aftermath of the battle, Somerled's once vast sea kingdom fragmented into numerous successor states, generally being split into vying overlordships. 100 years later, at the Treaty of Perth, the Kingdom of the Isles was finally brought to an end when it was incorporated into Scotland. Somerled's descendants continued to rule as lords, as they and their subjects gradually became more Gaelicised over the years. Somerled's descendants continued to rule in Scotland for hundreds of years to come.